10,000 light-years distant from the grace of Holy Terror, can be found the hive world of Armageddon. For millennia, the steel of its titanic industries and the blood of its inexhaustible workforce have armed and armored the Astra Militarum across great swaths of the Segmentum Solar. Uncounted war zones and battlefields depend upon the output of Armageddon, without which guns would run dry, tanks would stand idle, and slaughters would be left unavenged. The toll of this effort is unignorable. Armageddon's oceans are poison, its continents barren wastes. The skies themselves churn with clouds of toxic ash, raining sheets of sludge and grime, oil and acid upon the toiling masses that call this planet home. Many times across its long and bloody history, the world of Armageddon itself has become a battlefield, for its loss would be a wound the equal of fallen Cadia, and one from which the Imperium of man might not survive. But to those who would dare to claim this world as their own, it is not the corrosive air, the boiling seas, or the pits of burning tar that represent the greatest peril. It is instead the violent storms that will inevitably appear on the horizon whenever the enemies of mankind make their designs known. Crackling, malevolent clouds of dust the color of rusted gunmetal, rising upwards from the earth into the horizon, spanning walls of roiling, billowing wrath, surging forward until the sands begin to shift and the very ground begins to tremble. The sound of thunder echoes across the flats, coalescing into an unceasing, deafening roar that empties even the most corrupted mind of all but a single thought: the cold, animalistic certainty that something vast and cruel and terrible has arrived. From the maelstrom they emerge, a legion of steel, a legion of Armageddon. Of the countless Militarum Regimentum established across the Imperium, rare are those capable of offensive mobile warfare. The Armageddon Steel Legion is a storied exception. Like any hive world within the Imperium, the planet's tithe demands regiments of every nature: infantry, armored, artillery, and siege. Yet its potent industries have equipped a disproportionate number of mechanized regiments, from which the entire Militarum Regimentum takes its name. These forces are distinguished by their domestically produced and highly regarded variants of standard Imperial equipment. At the forefront is the legendary Chimera family of armored vehicles, with every mechanized infantry unit assigned dedicated armored personnel transports, offering both enhanced mobility and organic fire support. Tanks, aircraft, and other vehicles are also more common in Steel Legion regiments, enabling certain types of rapid maneuvers usually exclusive to chapters of the Adeptus Astartes or more specialized military institutions. While only those regiments raised on Armageddon are considered an official part of the Regimentum, the Legion's doctrines have spread far beyond their home world. Many other Militarum Regimentum, particularly those integrated into Armageddon's supply chains, have attempted to raise their forces to the Steel Legion standard. Combined with Armageddon's own far-reaching deployments, the Steel Legion, or regiments modeled on them, can be found across the whole of the galaxy. The Militarum Regimentum of Armageddon follows the standard Imperial organizational models, with some discrepancies tolerated to accommodate or mitigate domestic advantages and weaknesses. The most meaningful way in which the Steel Legion differs from other regimentum is in its overall administration. Since the Second War for Armageddon, the planet has been ruled by a military council, with representatives of several distinct Imperial organizations, alongside the planetary governor, holding direct oversight over the Legion. When operating independently in the field, the largest Steel Legion deployments might be led by a Lord General Militant, with smaller forces sometimes mobilized under lower-ranking officers. In joint operations, however, Astra Militarum forces, including those of Armageddon, are most often subordinated to the Adeptus Astartes, Adeptus Sororitas, Adeptus Mechanicus, or other Imperial military institutions. Yet such is the depth of experience across the Armageddon Regimentum that it is not unheard of in certain theatres for the Steel Legion to hold overall command, their authority deferred to by those who recognise their immense talent for mechanized warfare. Within the regiments themselves, there are typically 12 companies, which depending on circumstances might be dedicated armour, artillery, or even standard dismounted infantry alongside the more prevalent mechanized forces. Additional units attached at the company or regimental level are more likely to include tank squadrons and other armoured fighting vehicles, airborne transports and gunships, or even self-propelled ballistic missile systems and super heavy tanks, again a result of Armageddon's prodigious industrial capacity. The Legion's stormtroopers represent another shift away from standard Imperial doctrine. Like their counterparts in the Death Corps of Krieg, these veteran soldiers are a fully integrated element of the regiment, and not a part of the Tempestus Scions, normally responsible for shock troops and commando units. Entire divisions of Steel Legion stormtroopers are sometimes deployed en masse, the regiment's most elite and experienced formations. Abhumans, a consistent byproduct of Armageddon's underhive, are also known to serve within the Legion. Ratlings especially are prevalent in its regiments, forming lethal sniper teams often with decades of experience maneuvering through the blight of hive cities to obtain the perfect shot. The Armageddon Steel Legion practices an ancient but highly effective form of maneuver warfare, its origins traced back by Imperial scholars to the interstate campaigns that preceded even the Emperor's rise. The martial brotherhoods of Old Terra's forgotten kingdoms, those remembered only as Germani, Merica, and Sov Muscovy, may have been the first to employ it on the battlefield, and its essential principles have endured through every age of war. Often described as combined arms or mechanized warfare, it is built on a single insight, that the engine is every bit as formidable a weapon as the cannon, and when combined, an enemy's ability to respond might be ruptured faster than they can recover. Unlike the great many infantry or siege-focused regiments across the Astra Militarum who seek only to push a front line forward, the Steel Legion pursues a deeper breakthrough, piercing through the enemy to strike at the heart of their ability to fight. Armageddon's armies utilize spearhead formations intended to punch through weak points before isolating stronger ones, with follow-on forces rapidly maneuvering into any breakthroughs to further exploit the breach before it can close. Tanks, infantry, and aircraft must work in concert to maximize devastation and confusion amongst the enemy, but once the breakthrough has been achieved, this represents only the first stage in a much larger operation. Mechanized forces pour into the gap and drive towards objectives deep in the enemy rear. Headquarters units, supply depots, bridges, or crossroads, collapsing the entire front rather than just a point of contact. By the time the enemy understands where the main effort has been focused, the moment to counter it has already passed, and the battlefield situation to which any reserves might have been committed no longer exists. Maintaining a tempo of operations beyond the enemy's ability to match is of critical importance, and would be impossible for the Legion without Armageddon's vast industrial base and unrelenting production lines. Armageddon pattern equipment is renowned for its quality and reliability, but its armored fighting vehicles in particular, environmentally sealed against even the most toxic environments, are what makes its rapid maneuvers a reality on the battlefield. The Chimera armored personnel carrier is at the forefront of this effort, nearly synonymous with the Steel Legion itself. Though prodigious across the breadth of the Imperium, few other regiments operate the Chimera in comparable numbers, or have mastered its use so thoroughly. Armageddon pattern Sentinels offer another unique capability, able to support a rapid advance even through terrain traditionally resilient to wheeled or tracked vehicles. Self-propelled Basilisk artillery and Medusa siege guns are also prevalent across the Steel Legion, conducting shaping operations to create the conditions for a decisive breakthrough and direct fire support when on the advance. Individual guardsmen of Armageddon are recognized by their toxin-resistant, heavy greatcoats and distinctive rebreathers that protect them from the corrosive and venomous air that chokes the wastes. Their standard issue weapon is the Voss pattern lasgun, a smaller carbine model with a collapsible stock, better suited to the cramped interiors of armored personnel carriers. Faceless, fleshless soldiers, the Armageddon Steel Legion has nevertheless earned great renown and battle honors across not only their home world, but the whole of the galaxy. Knowledge of how the Imperium came to possess the world of Armageddon has been buried beneath ages of war and cataclysm, leaving much of its early ages an enduring, if ultimately unimportant, mystery. Strange irregularities in its orbit and mineral composition even seem to suggest that the planet's position within its star system might not have been a natural occurrence. Strange excavation sites predating Imperial settlement but resembling Mechanicus methods have also been periodically discovered across the planet, though the priesthood of Mars has offered no insights into what might have been removed, or for what purpose. Yet its growth into a hive world was almost an inevitability. Armageddon's strategic position at a nexus of stable warp corridors, combined with its wealth of natural resources, could not be ignored by the Departamento Militarum. From the moment of its colonization, the planet's standing amongst the Segmentum's industrial centers continued to rise, until it was regarded as one of the most important producers of war material across the whole of the Imperium. Armageddon's Militarum Regimentum was established during this time, its culture, equipment, and doctrine informed by the toxic, unforgiving ground of their homeworld. 4 titanic campaigns fought across Armageddon have defined the Steel Legion, though the first remains confused and shrouded. Almost no records survive, and those that do offer only fragments, with the identity of the invaders, the nature of the war, and even the outcome itself a matter of whisper and conjecture. Several Astartes chapters appear to have participated, most notably the Space Wolves, for the name Armageddon is emblazoned upon their battle standards, yet no Steel Legion regiment has ever claimed honors from this conflict, and it is entirely unknown within the wider Astra Militarum. A great tragedy may have befallen the planet soon after, possibly an industrial accident or disease that left much of its population sterilized. Yet this also seems to have coincided with an enormous expansion of the planet's extraction industries, which unexpectedly benefited from a sudden influx of forced labor. It was in the Second War for Armageddon that the Steel Legion earned the reputation it has carried through all its battles since. In the 941st year of M41, the warlord prophet Ghazghul Mag Uruk Thraka, having assembled a massive war that united the orcs of 5 separate tribes, launched a titanic invasion into the Armageddon sector. The assault took the Imperial defenders completely by surprise and exposed the gross negligence of Armageddon's planetary governor and sector overlord, Hermann von Straub. Fearful of the Imperium's judgment should his laxity be exposed, Straub refused to contact any higher authority and actively prevented any kind of distress call. His attempts at a counterattack ended in disaster, with much of Armageddon's Titan Legion lost in the process, while inflicting only a minimal delay on the designs of Ghazghul. After the surrender and enslavement of Hive City Infernus, the total capitulation of the planet, the entire sector seemed inevitable. Only the Steel Legion remained. But as the orcs began laying siege to the neighboring Hades Hive, Armageddon's regimentum were rallied under an unexpected figure. Sebastian Yarrick, a commissar of the Officio Prefectus, who had been banished to Hades early in the fighting for his criticism of the governor's strategy, was now tasked with leading an impossible defense. Remarkably, Yarrick seemed to possess an inhuman understanding of the orc mind, and tailored his strategies to provoke the Greenskins, and Ghazghul especially, into a costly battle of attrition. Baited by Yarrick's ingenious and lethal tactics, Ghazghul himself took direct command of the orc attack, turning the siege of Hades' hive into a personal struggle between the two commanders. Yarrick, however, was equally adept at organizing the Imperial defense. Elements of the Steel Legion, trapped in the city, were rapidly reinforced by conscripted Imperial citizens, alongside the underhive street gangs that just weeks prior might have tried to gun down the same authorities that were now arming them. Pressed into the defense, Yarrick's ragtag army was extraordinarily effective in the close confines of their home, where their detailed knowledge of the underlevels and tunnels turned the hive itself into a weapon against the orcs. By the time the Imperium finally grew aware of the situation and reinforcements flooded into the star system, Hades had nearly fallen, and the remainder of Armageddon's hive cities was similarly under siege. Yet Ghazghkull had become so fixated on Yarrick that he was now blind to the unfolding situation and willing to lose the war for the mere chance of killing his hated rival. Yarrick ultimately escaped, and Lord Commander Dante, chapter master of the Blood Angels, masterminded the Imperial counterattack that would break the siege of Hades and save the entire Armageddon sector. The Second War for Armageddon elevated the Steel Legion from merely another regimentum in the Astra Militarum to one of the finest, most capable forces across the Imperium. Its soldiers were hailed alongside those of Cadia, Valhalla, Krieg, and Katachan as courageous and unyielding in the face of overwhelming odds. At the height of the conflict, more regiments were being raised from the hives of Armageddon than any other two worlds combined across the entire Segmentum Solar. In the aftermath, this immense mobilization never abated, and a military council assumed direct control over Armageddon's Militarum Regimentum. Deeply desired for their mastery over mechanized warfare and proficiency against the orcs, Steel Legion regiments became an increasingly common sight across the warfronts, campaigns, and crusade fleets of the Imperium. Just 57 years after his first attack, on the feast of the Emperor's Ascension in the 998th year of M41, Ghazghkull returned to Armageddon, sparking the Third Great War for the planet. In an act of brutal vengeance, Hive Hades was bombarded from orbit, completely destroying the city, so the humiliation inflicted on the orcs there could never be repeated. Battles raged furiously across the surface of the planet, but Imperial forces were quick to come to Armageddon's aid. Multiple Astartes chapters, including the Salamanders, Black Templars, and Blood Angels, deployed forces to the war zone, but it was the return of Commissar Yarrick that proved the greatest asset. What followed was not a war of decisive engagements, but of attrition on a scale the Segmentum had rarely suffered. Whole regiments simply evaporated across the front lines, and when the season of fire grounded the Imperium's aircraft and blinded its Titan legions, the conflict was dragged down into the hab blocks and ash wastes where the Steel Legion's intimate knowledge of their world once again proved decisive. Year upon year, their regiments held, bled, and were raised anew from the hives they defended, but the losses were cataclysmic. Despite the great wealth of treasure, blood, and bone expended in the Imperial defense, victory was never within reach. Ghazghkull had not desired to conquer Armageddon, but to transform it. The entire sector was now a whetstone against which his host might be tested, a place where all the armies of the orcs could be ground down against the Imperium to be remade into something harder and more terrible than any war before. Even Yarrick could not endure, crushed in Ghazghkull's grip, while the world the Commissar had fought for so long to defend burned all around him. With his nemesis seemingly dead, Ghazghkull eventually withdrew the bulk of his strength to carry the war elsewhere, leaving Armageddon overrun by the feral, bloated remnants of his horde. A narrow Imperial triumph was declared, but the fighting never ceased. Orcish reinforcements continued to flood into the sector, drawn to what they called the Big Scrap of Ragnarok, sacred ground amongst their kind. Thus was the Steel Legion damned to a war without end, waged across its own cities, its own soil. Now, in the Era Indomitus, the blood-stained battlefields of Armageddon have drawn the attention of far darker powers. The great warp storms that cut the galaxy in twain likewise twisted and corrupted half the planet into a hellish landscape beyond recognition. Only the intervention of the Ordo Malleus prevented Armageddon from becoming a demon world, but the Greenskins and Imperium alike now find themselves fighting across a nightmare born from the madness of Gazgul and the great game of the Chaos Gods, a battlefield on which no force might stand and live. The Steel Legion, it is claimed, has been worn down across the generations to a fraction of its original strength, increasingly reliant on the regimentum of Lost Cadia or Krieg, the Astartes or the Mechanicus, to hold the trenches beneath the burning hives. Victory has abandoned Armageddon, those same voices wail, that the falling toxic ash covers nothing but mass graves and charnel pits, forever cast in shades of blood by the burning pyres that rage from dusk till dawn. But from every comlink and vox tower, another voice has been heard, one that speaks only in the language of vengeance, one that heralds only the storm. Yarrick has returned to Armageddon, and among the faithful, there can be no doubt that crackling malevolent clouds the color of rusted gunmetal will soon appear on the horizon. Titanic walls of roiling, billowing wrath, surging forward until the sands begin to shift and the very ground begins to tremble. The sound of thunder will soon echo again across the flats, coalescing into an unceasing, deafening roar that will empty even the most corrupted mind of all but a single thought. The cold, animalistic certainty that something vast and cruel and terrible has arrived.